On December 2025, the spot price of silver did something it hasn't done in nearly 5 decades of trading. It didn't just touch a new high, it shattered the psychological $60 barrier, tapping $64.20 before stabilizing. While retail headlines focused on the price tag, institutional eyes were fixed on a far more alarming metric deep within the London bullion market: lease rates. For the first time since the 1980s, it now costs significantly more to borrow physical silver for a month than to buy it for future delivery, a condition traders call backwardation. This development has caught the attention of major banks, with Bank of America releasing a note just 24 hours later discussing what they call price convexity. Before we dive into the mechanics of this squeeze, I need to be clear. This video is for educational and informational purposes only. I am not a financial advisor. All opinions shared are my own and based on publicly available information. Please do your own research before making any financial decisions. In this video, I'm documenting a market structure shift that commodity historians have warned about for years. It is the transition from a discretionary investment market to a non-discretionary industrial necessity. Here is what we will examine together. Commodity historians have documented a recurring sequence in finite resource markets. I call this the liquidity vacuum pattern, not as a prophecy, but as an analytical lens. Let me walk you through how this pattern typically unfolds. Stage 1 usually begins with drawdown stealth, where visible inventories decline for years while price remains stagnant. This is often ignored by the mainstream because above-ground stockpiles still seem sufficient. Stage 2 emerges when those stockpiles hit a critical operational floor. This is where the paper market, futures, and derivatives begins to decouple from the physical market. We see premiums rise on real metal while digital prices lag. Stage 3 is the convexity phase. This is when price action becomes non-linear. Instead of rising 1% on good news, it rises 5%. Because there is no loose inventory left to absorb the buying pressure. Finally, stage 4 is demand destruction, where the price rises high enough to force industries to stop using the metal. To understand how this pattern plays out in reality, let's examine what happened in 2011. Many of you remember the run to $49. According to historical data from the Silver Institute, the 2011 spike was driven primarily by investment demand. Following the 2008 financial crisis, quantitative easing programs terrified investors about inflation. They rushed into silver as a monetary hedge. In the initial phase, which lasted from late 2010 to April 2011, we saw massive inflows into ETFs like SLV. Contemporary observers at the time noted that the buying was discretionary, meaning people bought silver because they wanted to, not because they needed to for manufacturing. As conditions progressed into the second phase, the weakness of the 2011 rally was exposed. Because the demand was purely financial, it was fragile. When margins were raised by exchanges in May 2011, making it more expensive to hold speculative positions, the investors simply sold. They didn't need the silver for a factory, they just wanted a profit. The price collapsed from nearly $50 back to the 30s in weeks. The lesson from 2011 was clear. A squeeze driven by paper speculators is easy to break. You just change the rules, raise margin requirements, and the demand evaporates. Now let's rewind further to 1980, to the most famous silver event in history, the Hunt Brothers squeeze. At first glance, this seems like another speculative mania, but there was a crucial difference in mechanics. Nelson and William Hunt didn't just buy futures contracts, they took physical delivery. By January 1980, they and their partners controlled roughly half of the world's deliverable silver. The price surged from $6 to nearly $50, which, adjusted for inflation, would be well over $140 today. When we apply our analytical framework to 1980, we see the liquidity vacuum in its most extreme form. The Hunts created a vacuum by removing the metal from circulation. Stage 3, convexity, hit in early 1980. The price action became violent. However, just like in 2011, the demand was artificial. It relied on a single entity continuing to buy. When regulators intervened and restricted buying to liquidation only, the hunts were forced to sell. The price crashed. Both 1980 and 2011 share a fatal flaw. The buyers could be forced to walk away. They were discretionary buyers. Before we examine current conditions, let's consider the counter-arguments. Not all analysts agree that we are facing a structural shortage. Some economists argue that a global recession in 2026 will crush industrial demand, sending silver plummeting back to the 40s or 30s. They point to weakening manufacturing data in Germany and China as evidence that the industrial supercycle is a myth. These experts contend that if factories slow down, they will need less silver paste, regardless of how efficient solar panels are. Furthermore, they argue that hidden stockpiles in private vaults, often called shadow inventory, will flood the market the moment prices stay above $60, capping any rally. These are valid considerations. Markets are complex, adaptive systems. Variables that could alter any projected scenario include new mining technologies that extract silver cheaper, or a substitution breakthrough where copper replaces silver in solar panels. What I'm presenting is pattern-based analysis, not inevitable prophecy. With that context established, let's examine the unique data from December 2025. I want to be clear, we are comparing current data to historical patterns, not declaring certainties. But when analysts compare 2025 to 1980 or 2011, they note a fundamental difference: inelasticity. According to the Silver Institute 2025 update released on December 9th, the solar industry now consumes 29% of all annual silver supply. This is up from just 11% in 2014. This is the critical variable. A solar panel manufacturer cannot simply decide not to buy silver because the price is high. If they don't buy silver, they don't make solar panels. If they don't make panels, they go bankrupt. Their demand is inelastic. They must buy at market price, whether that price is $30, $60, or $100. On December 11th, when silver hit $64.20, it wasn't just speculators buying. Reports from the physical market suggest industrial fabricators were panic buying to secure inventory for the first quarter of 2026. This brings us to the Bank of America note regarding convexity. The bank's analysts highlighted that COMEX registered inventories, the metal available for immediate delivery, have fallen to levels that provide almost no buffer against a supply shock. When we look at the London lease rates, the data confirms this stress. As of this week, the annualized cost to lease silver implies a shortage of immediately available bars. This is the definition of a liquidity vacuum. Unlike 2011, where higher prices caused investors to sell, in 2025, higher prices are causing industrialists to hoard. They are terrified that if they don't secure metal now, they won't have it later. The shadow inventory that bears talk about has not appeared. Despite prices doubling over the last 2 years, we have not seen a flood of old silverware or bars hitting the refineries. This suggests that the easy-to-mobilize silver is already gone. What we cannot know with certainty includes exact timelines. Our historical cases varied from months to years. We also can't predict government intervention. If silver is deemed a critical strategic mineral, which the U.S. Department of Energy has already hinted at, we could see export bans or price controls. Past patterns guide, they don't guarantee. Analysts examining similar historical situations have modeled several potential scenarios. I want to emphasize, these are possibilities based on past precedent, not guaranteed predictions. Scenario A is the industrial squeeze. In this model, industrial users panic. They move from just-in-time inventory management to just-in-case hoarding. They begin buying 6 to 12 months of supply up front. This creates a feedback loop. As they hoard, the floating supply vanishes, pushing prices to Bank of America's $100 target rapidly. In this scenario, the paper market breaks, and the physical price detaches completely from the spot price. We would see massive premiums on physical bars, similar to what happened in the nickel market in 2022. Scenario B is the deflationary crush. If the global economy enters a severe depression in 2026, demand for everything, including solar panels and electronics, could collapse. In this scenario, even the inelastic demand shrinks. The price would likely retrace significantly, punishing those who bought the top. However, history shows that during stagflation, where economy slows but inflation stays high, silver often performs well as a currency hedge, even if industrial use dips. A third possibility involves the green confiscation theory. This is where governments intervene directly. They could mandate that refineries only sell to strategic industries like defense and energy, effectively banning retail investment. This would kill the paper market but make physical silver in private hands incredibly valuable in black markets. For those studying commodity supply-demand dynamics, here's how professional analysts typically structure their research. They usually monitor three specific public data sources. First, they watch the COMEX registered category daily. This tells you exactly how much metal is available to back the futures contracts. If this number drops towards zero, volatility explodes. Second, they monitor the EFP, or exchange for physical volume. This tracks how many traders are swapping paper contracts for London physical bars. A spike here often signals trouble in New York. Third, they watch the lease rates we discussed earlier. You can often find this data through industry reports from groups like the LBMA or specialized data providers. Researchers focused on demand typically examine the quarterly reports from major solar manufacturers like Jinko Solar or First Solar. They look for mentions of raw material shortages or margin compression due to silver costs. Students of commodity history often review the 1970 to 1980 period for comparative context on how inflation affects hard assets. Those wanting to study these topics further can access public resources like the U.S. Geological Survey's mineral summaries or the Silver Institute's annual surveys. I want to reiterate, this framework is for educational research only. My role is documenting patterns and presenting analysis, not advising individual financial actions. Anyone considering decisions should consult licensed professionals. We've examined a documented pattern across two major historical cases, 1980 and 2011, and compared them to the unique inelastic conditions of 2025. We've explored the implications of the $64 breakout and the vanishing inventory buffer. Key observations include the shift from discretionary investment demand to mandatory industrial consumption and the critical signals coming from the lease rate market. Critical acknowledgments remain. Markets are unpredictable, past patterns don't guarantee outcomes, multiple scenarios are possible, and timing is inherently uncertain. My purpose is documenting patterns and facilitating informed discussion, not predicting the future or providing financial advice. What's your perspective on the pattern we've examined? Do you believe the industrial demand floor will hold, or will a recession drag silver back down? Let me know in the comments. I read and learned from thoughtful responses. Thank you for engaging with this analysis. Stay curious and stay informed.